probably 3 years ago, we obviously realised that there was an issue with the lakes. Every summer it would blow really hard, and we get an area that keeps blowing into the paddock where we're trying to crop, that nothing grows. It's just this horrible sticky lake dust. So we want to try and get a bit of ground cover on the edge of the lake just to stop that wind erosion issue, and that'll hopefully allow us to start reclaiming some of that land for cropping, and eventually down the track it might be suitable for sheep grazing as well if we can fence it off. So yeah, we're enthusiastic about what the NyPa can do for us, and in a few years' time it'll be interesting to see what happens.
I first found out about NyPa grass in the late 80s actually, and what interested me about them was that they had a deep root structure which could get into this sort of semi-sterile saline land and gradually change it from being an organically inactive place to an organically active place, and it might also produce some sheep feed, kind of analogous with Hunter evolution in the sandhills, which put roots down quite deep and changed the use of that country. So we've been trying these plants in many different parts of Australia now, and indeed they do that. They'll colonise the appropriate saline seepage sites where there's water coming to the surface or near the surface, and they will gradually over 10 years change it from being a sterile site to a quite nice soil place with clover and ryegrass and things like that coming back into it. In fact, some places it seems like we can sow a crop in over this country later, so the country which used to be cropped and went out because of salt, it may be possible to crop it again, although we haven't done that on any sort of scale.
Started planting this at home at Wickapin back in early 90s. Had an introduction to John Leake and the company, and they started off with the first variety we tried was called a wild wheat. Actually looks like a wild rice grain, but the one we wanted to get our hands on was the one they call the Forage variety, which is growing up here at Moora. We started with one plant, I think it was in 1994. We've now spread that over probably 23 hectares at home with varied results. Sandier areas, it's done really well. The biggest thing we found when we first started going to bigger areas was the mindset that you had to find somewhere that was salty enough for the plant to grow. When we first started planting it, we were using capeweed and barley grass as indicator species where we'd plant it, and there was an area that was that wet and that salty we buried a tractor, and we thought it'll never grow there, and the funny thing was that was where it grew best. So it's really a mindset from a farming perspective, is there's actually plants out there that not only enjoy growing in a salty environment, they have to have salt to live. And that was one of the attractions with this plant, is that it won't grow in a fresh area. It'll get out-competed by the other plants. So at the moment it's done really well. We've found plants, we've dug down with backhoes, we've dug down to about 1.80 metre, found root systems down there. Water table generally sits at around, during winter months, at about 30 to 40 centimetres. So the plants go right down through there, can't get waterlogged. It's just an unbelievably good plant for growing on this environment.
So actually, Rachel, there's quite a few of these different sorts of these plants that also have this same soil benefit. Using the forage on treated effluent water has been quite successful. There's a land-based aquaculture project at Moora where the government didn't want them to discharge nutrients into the landscape. So we planted forage, and it's very good feed, and it's stripping more than almost 96% of the nutrients out of the water column, and then they can discharge the rest of the water into the environment. In America, they're using the same thing on factories that are involved in food processing. They take the effluent out of the factories, the effluent out of the or the irrigation drainage water, and use that to grow forage. At Wagen, we were pumping the salt water from underneath Wagen to save the infrastructure of the town, and we established some turf trials with other different turfs, and the NyPa turf variety, which is quite a dwarf variety, performed very well in those trials. It's a very low risk thing. There's another plant which produces a grain which is no gluten, and we also grow in these very degraded salty areas, and it has a high price as a gourmet grain. We haven't been able to get the yields in Australia that we've obtained in Mexico for this grain, but we're going to do more trials, some at Moora, to see if we can find how we can boost the yield. If we can get a tonne or two per hectare, and it's 5 times the price of other cereals, then it's a really worthwhile crop. And like the forage, once you plant it once and you've got it forever. You just need to harvest it each year, so it would be a marvellous use of the land.